All right, guys, it is Tuesday. I am out here working on the four-door 55 chassis. The Fiat, if you've been following my channel, the Fiat, the fuel pump's out. I actually tried to order the part from O'Reilly's Saturday, and yesterday, Monday, rolled around. They are waiting. They submitted the order, but they're waiting on Precision to call them back. So I called them. Actually, I drove down there yesterday morning. I took my wife to work and I drove the truck down there because I had to pick up a couple of parts that I'd ordered for the car maintenance stuff. Anyway, got down there. I asked the kid, you know, have you heard anything on the fuel pump? No, I haven't heard anything. You'll probably hear something around noon. So 1:30 p.m. rolls around. They still hadn't called me. So I called and actually talked to the manager. I like the guy. He always gets stuff done. He said he still hadn't heard anything. He'll call me back. Well, I know he probably got busy. He didn't call me back. So I called down there this morning. Said he still hadn't heard anything. Would you like me to contact Fiat and try to get it for you? And I was like, no, I can get it from Fiat myself. So anyway, I got on the phone. I called Advance. I called AutoZone, and that fuel pump was $549, I think, from one, and $563 from the other. So I got on the internet at Summit Racing's website, which is where I order most of my parts. It was $439, so I just went ahead and ordered it. And, you know, now it's on the way, and I don't have to wait for somebody to call somebody back and be, you know, last person on the list to find out anything. So, anyway, so the car is still sitting here. I've already changed all the spark plugs and all the maintenance stuff on it, so that is the only thing left is that. So, kind of irritating. I don't know how long it's going to take to get it. It is shipped directly from the manufacturer, and we know how long that's going to be. Anyway, so the four-door frame, I'm out here messing with it. I'm planning on, as it gets hotter this afternoon, I will be able to close the door, open the door to the house, and, you know, get some AC in here, because I'm already soaking wet with sweat. But I have some grinding and stuff I need to do, so I want to go ahead and do that stuff first. I'm going to do it outside in the driveway, so I don't do it in here and throw sparks on my hardtop and all that stuff. But anyway, I've got my original rear end here, which I'd started removing a couple of the items on it. I had to remove the junction block bracket from the rear. I'm going to be transferring it to the 10-bolt rear end. And I'm going to go ahead and cut off these perches and leaf spring perches, and I'm going to transfer them to that rear end as well. So I'll have some grinding to do on that rear end to get the old brackets off, and then I've got some welding to do, which more than likely I'll do out here in the driveway. And at that point, the rear end will need to be cleaned up and painted. More than likely going to spray paint it, because at this point on this car, I don't want to take the time and use all the materials and, you know, use a spray gun, which I normally do for chassis stuff. I'm just not going to do it. I have plenty of black spray paints here, so I'm just going to spray paint it. Anyway, right now, I've started setting up my table here with all the crap out here that I'm going to need, and luckily I have a few brake lines here. I only have one long one. So I've had a union over there in my box of stuff, so I put a union on it because it's going to be two lines here. But anyway, I'm going to be putting the brake line on here, and I've got to bend it to go to the factory brake hose, which I just kind of set it up there for mock-up. But anyway, I have these clamps that I got off my Buick Century's chassis for 3/16 brake lines. They're a factory-style clamp. I'll just use the wire wheel and the bench grinder and clean these up a little bit and just spray paint them silver. But I've got all these ARP black bolts here, black oxide hex head bolts that actually fit the size hole in here. This is originally what comes in a frame for a G-body, but these are threaded, you know, ARP bolts. So I have a tap set, so I'm going to drill and tap the frame for those bolts in there, and they'll be ARPs just because I have them here. You know, they're brand new, might as well use them. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and get this brake line part here bent and mounted up to there. And this union is kind of going to be out here in the open. There's not going to be anything here in the way, so I think that's a good spot for it. I was working on my cousin's 55, and he had brake lines somebody had ran up here, and that's where the union was. And I didn't know if they were tight, so, you know, kind of a little something I wouldn't have done, but, you know, not everybody would think about that. Not saying I'm an expert at thinking about that. I'm just saying I wouldn't have done that. I would have thought about where it's easy to access and, you know, tighten stuff if you have a leak. But Anyway, that is pretty much where I'm going to put the brake line. Now I did transfer the brake line stuff to the driver's side of the chassis. The bracket right here, I actually plug welded on here, flipped it over. This goes here. That's the two drill marks that didn't go all the way through from drilling the spot welds out of that and removing it. Because I'm going with a dual reservoir master cylinder, and instead of running that rear brake line all the way across with two lines going across the front and then back, it's just easier to drop it off the master and straight down and down that way. So that's what I'm going to do. I have a lot of cleanup stuff to do. If you've been following my channel, you know my compressor's not in good shape, so I'm a little bit nervous of trying to blast this stuff. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to set up a catch box out here with some plastic to where it'll catch a lot of the media, so I don't have to go down and buy a whole bunch. I can kind of recirculate it through a screen and sift it back in there. But anyway, I'm going to try to just kind of roughly blast this stuff, and then I'll try to finish it by hand, because if I sit there and try to make it, you know, all the way gray, shiny, clean metal, you know, that compressor is going to run a long time, and it's going to take a lot of time on top of that. So I bought these. These are brand new plastic sliders. They're spring liner inserts is what they are for your leaf springs. They're actually supposed to go, in case you don't know, see these raised squares in your leaves? They actually go in between. What that does is it makes your suspension work a lot smoother, but over the years, you know, they fall apart. They wear out and come to pieces and go away, you know. But anyway, if you do not run them, this is what happens. These are starting to eat in a little bit. They're getting a little groove war in them. So what I will do is take it apart, and I'll go in here with a grinder disc, a flap wheel, and I'll just kind of radius it just a little bit. I'm not going to try to eat into it. I'm just going to kind of feather edge that hard edge right there, and then reinstall them units and then put it back together. One thing I figured out, I got a pair of leaves from a subscriber. He actually drove them over here in his 56 four-door and gave me his old leaf springs. One of them had a sag in it, and it was about, I'd say, a ½ inch or 3/4 of an inch drop height difference when you set them up side by side, which is common. I mean, that's what happens. Anyway, so I took his tallest one out of the two he gave me, and then the one that is original to a 55 Chevy, which is right here, because if you remember watching the other video, I had a mix match spring from who knows what on here. I'm pretty sure it's Tri-5, but it was like an inch lower. It was a different design as well with the clamps and everything. Anyway, his tallest spring compared to my original spring are the same exact height. So I'm going to use this spring and then his tallest spring. So I'm going to go ahead and blow this leaf apart, clean it up, feather edge everything. You know, I'm going to spend a couple hours working on these. Also, the springs that he gave me actually have new bushings in them. I got a brand new bushing from O'Reilly's last week because what I was going to have to do was take the shorter leaf. You can re-arch your leaf springs to make them match in height. You can re-arch them in a press, you know, and just work them. There's plenty of videos on YouTube if you're interested in that. But anyway, a buddy of mine's shop that I would go to re-arch those, I'd actually talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he said I could go, you know, down there anytime, use this press. It's about a 45-minute drive for me, so I would burn all that gas up, waste the time, and in that time, I can get this old bushing out and replace this bushing for $10. So it's cheaper for me just to use this leaf and change that bushing, because I got to rebuild both springs anyway, you know, with these new liners. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. I did watch a video, it's been several months ago, from a leaf spring guy, and he talked about leaf springs when you're rebuilding them yourself in your driveway or whatever. He doesn't recommend painting the leaves independently and then putting them together. He recommends bolting everything together and then like blast it or sand it or whatever and paint it. He doesn't like the idea of paint being in between there. I mean, whatever, it's constantly metal on metal, so it's going to keep itself clean. I mean, these things are going to rust anyway from the wear, you know, so that's what I'm going to do there. But anyway, so my plan is today to hopefully have the leaves in it and maybe get the rear end in it. Don't know if it's going to happen, but that's kind of my goal. I do have new leaf spring bushings here. They're in my shed in a box. I'm going to have to go find them. Anyway, so it's pretty much going to be work on 55 four-door chassis until the Fiat's fixed. And then as soon as I get the pump in stock here to work on that, shipped in, I'm going to start working on the Fiat, because right now, if I needed to go to get parts, I'm going to have to charge the battery on my motorcycle to go downtown, or walk down to my mom and dad's and borrow the truck. So anyway, I got plenty on my plate I can do here until then, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Big mess. Anyway, I think I guess I'll get started on these leaf springs. It's getting hot, let me tell you. Man, oh man. Here we go. So I'm actually out here in my junkyard, I call it. I've got some G-bodies out here. Anyway, since I'm using G-body brake line clamps, I'm going to try to get the pattern off of this so I can transfer it to that frame in there. They have a big guide hole for that. It has a little spade piece that's like bent down to locate the clamp to keep it straight. So I need to know exactly where this is from this hole. So I'm going to take just a piece of that, stick it on there, and give it a little smash. So there's my 2 holes. Anyway, now I get to go in there and knock these holes out. All right, so what I'm going to do is try to draw around that hole there, because I can see the indent from me pressing on that frame. This one's quite a bit bigger. Anyway, so that is the size holes I'm working with there. Now what I will do to punch the holes out in that, you can cut them out with an X-Acto knife, but this is what I use. I've got these casings here, and I will try to find one that's about the right size. Looks like that one will fit that one. And that one will be that one. It's nice having spent casings because they work perfect for using a small hammer and just punch that cardboard out. What I use is a piece of plywood here. And you don't have to hit it very hard, but this is tough to do one-handed. Anyway, this is how. Actually, what I need to do is I need to caliper out. I know this hole, the big hole, is going to be the correct size because these clamps have this alignment deal on them here, and the hole probably doesn't even need to be that size, but anyway, that's the way the factory had it, so that's what I'm going to do, but that would go on like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to caliper out one of these ARP bolts, and I just realized that these are metric 8 by 20, so I need to look and see if I even have a stupid thing for that. But anyway, I'll caliper out the size of the, just stick it on the thread part of the bolt and make sure the hole's about the, I mean, it looks, oh yeah, that's a perfect hole. Alright, so this will end up working. I don't need caliper crap. I'm just gonna roll with it there. Well, I don't even think it went through it, did it? That worked. It's redneck, but hell, it works. Especially if you're making gaskets out of cork. These work good on cork because the casing metal's so thin. Oh, there ain't no bitty spot left on there. Hard to do one-handed. Anyway, there's my template. Alright, I got the brake line on. I only put 2 clamps on it. I did have to put a little kick out here for this bracket to get it off of it. I didn't want it actually riding on any metal, but anyway, them clamps from that G-body, they have that locator tab, and this one I started to drill the hole, so you'd have to drill 2 holes. Then I decided I'd just cut those off with a cut-off wheel, those tabs, and just drill 1 hole and tap it. So that's what I did. So it kind of sucked. The ARP bolts that I have are metric. They're 8 by 1.25. And I wanted to use them because they're brand new. They're here. I wouldn't use them on anything else. So, and luckily I had, it's a crappy tap, but I had a tap here for that. Now I didn't know what drill bit size went with this. So I had to do a little research on Google, come to find out. Of course it gives a metric thing, but somebody had said a 17/64 works, and it did. I don't usually like this style of tap that's just flat on the end. I like the ones that have a point. These ones that are flat on the end are really more of a cleaner die than a, making thread die from a hole that's been drilled. But anyway, so I had to use it is all I had. So I had to start to tighten it a little bit, and then it would get to where it felt like it was going to break, and I'd have to back it off just a hair, and then so it took a while back and forth to get the thing threaded, but I ended up getting it done. Anyway, so this brake line is pretty much mounted. I don't have enough brake line here. I need a longer piece to go up to the front, and I really won't know until I get the master cylinder on, so I'll probably do that forward part after the master cylinder. The body's on the frame and the master cylinder's mounted, so that'll be pretty simple. But that way it'll keep me from running two brake lines together across the cradle like the aftermarket sets you buy, because I flipped the brake line. So I think I might have talked about it earlier, but I did end up deciding to use one of my original leafs that was the exact same height when you set it upright to that one that I got give to me. So of course the bushing and the one that was original to the car was completely shot, so I bought a bushing for $10 from O'Reilly's, and these are a pain in the butt to get out. They're not terrible, so you can do this in the matter of about 10 minutes. What I like to do, now I don't have a press, so it makes it a little tougher. If you had a press at your place, it's a lot easier. But anyway, you have, your rubber bushing, and it has this sleeve in it, and there's rubber all around it. So what I did was I took a drill bit, just a small one on the drill, and I just drilled it all the way through, like all the way around. And what that did is it pretty much allowed this to knock out pretty easy. That way you have the metal exposed. Then at that point I used a die grinder with a cone burr on the end, and you can kind of see my groove there I started. But I ended up doing it where the spring is actually separated up here, where this part's rolled around. And I sat there and basically ground through that pretty much all the way, or close to it. And then I used a chisel punch and a hammer and went in there and split it. And then once I got, the opposite side of it, I started putting that chisel in there and hammering it out, and it actually went out pretty easy. And then the new one, I just laid it down flat like that on the concrete, and I used a socket that fit over that rubber real nice, because you have a lip on one side. Now when you're doing these bushings, pay attention, because the bushing has a flange on one side and the other side it does not. So anyway, make sure to do one at a time and put it in the correct way. But anyway, I put the socket on there and I hammered it on, and it actually went in kind of nice. I did use a little barrel roll down in there. These are pretty wore out, but it got all the the loose rust and the crud out of there. Anyway, I just cleaned it up a little bit. But anyway, I hammered it in pretty far, and then it got to where it needed to go just a hair further, and I ended up using the punch underneath the edge of it and to knock it the rest of the way, so it'll have some space, to move down further. But anyway, so I got the new bushing in this one. Now I need to knock these apart, which is that nut right there. I usually put a C-clamp on here and tighten it, and then I'll knock that nut off there and then loosen off the C-clamp, and it'll let it come apart. But I'm going to separate these, like split these apart a little bit so you can get it apart. And then I'll go in there and I'll try to clean up all the leaves really good with a knotted cut brush on the grinder. And then I'm going to go in there and smooth them edges off. And then put the new cushions on, put it together, and then I'll paint it. So leaf springs should be, I should have them painted today and installed rather quickly. Now I'm just going to use spray paint. I almost always use car paints, automotive spray paints through spray guns when I do chassis parts, well, most of my parts, because it holds up better to chemicals and that type of stuff, and it's more durable. But this is a daily driver, and I don't really want to spend that much time on it or the money using that more expensive stuff. Now the spray paint that I will be using is the Duplicolor engine enamel, because I have a lot of it here. This stuff, you know, it's designed to be put on an engine, so it's, you know, pretty much high heat, and it is actually pretty durable stuff. But I will tell you, when it's 90-something degrees outside and you're trying to spray that stuff, if you're wanting something super slick and shiny, it ain't going to work too good. That summer heat tends to, you know, really grain it out. So, which in this case, I don't really care. But anyway, back at it again. All right, so this is one of my original leaf springs that actually matches the height when you set them down on the ground side by side, arched upwards. So this one I went ahead and I'm going to rebuild it. Just redneck rebuilding driveway. Anyway, I put a new bushing in there, and now I'm going to show you something you need to look for, and this is going to be in just about any of them probably that you take apart. If you look right here, you can see an indent, and you can feel it, and also right here, I don't know how well that's going to show up, but that is a pretty good ridge right there, and that's from the sliders, you know, falling apart over time and then metal on metal happening. So what happens is you'll get some really hardcore spring action because your leaves are hitting that and then kicking up over it, kind of like a speed bump in the road, you know. Anyway, so what I've just done is I put on a flap wheel on my bench grinder, and I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to radius this a little bit. I'm not going to try to make it super flat. I'm just going to radius it just a little bit because I don't want to remove a lot of meat out of here. You know, you got the entire weight of the back of the car on these. You know, I'm just going to smooth that off a little bit so it has a smoother transition to go over it. And I've cleaned these up pretty decent with a knotted cut brush on the grinder first. And, you know, doesn't get them perfect. The only way to get them absolutely really super clean is to blast them, and my compressor is on its last leg, so I'm not going to even attempt it. You know, this is a daily driver, not a show car. And, you know, if you're doing a show car, you're probably better off buying new ones anyway. But leaf springs are just a little bit too much money for me right now, so I'm just going to rebuild my old ones. You would actually be amazed if you drove your car every day with the old original wore out leaves in it, and you even took the time to take your leaves apart and put new sliders in and re-arch them and everything, do all the work. Now there are spring shops that will rebuild your leaf springs for you. That's why most people nowadays, they just buy new. They're probably about the same price probably to buy new. I think back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was paying around 150 bucks, I think, to have my leaves rebuilt, but I would take them off the car and take them to the place. The last time I took a set of leaves over there, I had taken them apart and checked them over and everything and put them back together. And then I took them over there, and they actually called me 2 days later and they said these both sides are cracked, so they needed to be replaced. They weren't cracked because I took them apart and inspected them, but they will crack. So anyway, I've rebuilt them myself ever since, or bought new ones. Now I did buy brand new posies and put them on the hardtop, but I just don't have the money now to put them in this car, so I'm just going to rebuild these. So anyway, I'll show you here what I'm going to do. This one's really bad. Really, really bad. All right, actually ended up taking quite a bit of meat off of it, but it'll still be fine. This one actually needs more right here. Oh, I forgot to mention, before you take your leaves apart, you need to somehow mark them so you know which end they go on. So what I ended up doing was I took a cone burr on the die grinder and I put a deep little round dot right here, and I did it all on one end, all 4 leaves, so on one end. So I know that when I put it back together, I put the dot to dot to dot to dot, and that way it is in order the way it needs to be. So I'm gonna finish this one out and turn off the camera, and I'm gonna go eat lunch with my wife. She just got home for lunch. All right, nice and smooth. So anyway, I took a lot of meat out of this one, but when you get it off to the side and you look at the thickness, you don't see a real huge indent. I still had, you know, it still looks kind of nice. I mean, it is thinner, no doubt, because I removed material, but anyway, this is not how to properly redo your leaf springs. This is just my way of doing it to save money. But anyway, I'm gonna kill the camera and go eat lunch with my wife. Thanks for watching, guys. All right, so after I ground them, I started stacking the packs back together here. And keep in mind, like I said, I put dots on each end of these leaf packs. There's a dot there, I ground into it there, there, and there. So make sure all that's together, because I'll show you with this one, they are offset. That's why it is important to get them the correct way, because it is very easy to get them backwards. If you have the holes offset, you got more length back this way. So also inspect your bolts. Luckily I had that old leaf, I had to go take the bolt out of it, because the bolt out of this one was, not only was it bent, the threads were just wasted. So no way I would reuse that. But anyway, both the bolts I have now are okay. Now what I do when I go to put these back together is I use a really long bolt, just a 5/16 long bolt. And it's basically just to hold it together. And at that point, I'll take a C-clamp, and don't forget to put your sliders in first, your inserts. They got that square notch in them leaves there, and that's what holds them in there. So as this thing's all loosely put together, not bolted together yet, slide those in, because you'll have heck trying to get those in there if you've bolted that together. So these need to be in there first. As I stated earlier, a well-known leaf spring rebuilder said to not paint the leaves individually. You don't want paint in between there. This is just an item. A leaf spring is going to rust because it's constantly moving when you're driving it. So again, I am not an expert leaf spring rebuilder. I've had to do it this way quite a few times to save money, because I can tell you now, if I had plenty of extra money, I would buy a brand new set of leaf springs and be done with it. There's nothing like getting them in and just bolting them on. I'll have, you know, probably a half to 3/4 of a full day of work in this, but, you know, it's just the way it is. So anyway, now I'll pull my other bolt out. Now the head part of your bolt goes on the curved part, on the inside. That's what locates your rear end. So the nut goes on the bottom of the leaf. If it's on the car, it'll go on the bottom. So, and they don't have any kind of lock washer on it or nothing. It is just the bolt and the nut. Now, this leaf is rebuilt with new sliders. Oh man, look at that. See how smooth that is? Before you do it, it was kind of jerky the way it did it, because it was catching in them ground in spots, the more spots. Now, you can paint it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Oh, first I got to bend these deals over. Now these suck. I usually use a big pair of channel locks, but I'll actually use a hammer to begin with to get them pretty much where they need to go, I would say. I will say, if you got an old 55, 6, or 7 Chevy and you've, you know, just kind of done the mechanical part of it, and you're getting it out and driving it, and you have your window down, and you can hear it with your window down, like driving around low speed, and you hear a clicking while you're driving it, something going click, 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 and you can't find it, it's these deals right here. If these are loose, they will clack around. So that is what's loose on it. Just go in there with a hammer or channel locks or something and just tweak it out. I can tell you almost every one of the field car 4-doors that I drug in and just got back running and driving and put in service to sell it, every one of them were loose. The reason is your sliders are deteriorated away or gone, so you have that space there that's a void. It's actually tight enough, I think. Perfect. Now that is a driveway leaf spring refurb. I can't believe how smoother that is. That's awesome, man. Anyway. All right, guys. I'm gonna rebuild the other one now, paint them. All right, guys, so I got the leaves after I driveway rebuilt them, and I spray painted them. I used Duplicolor, I think it's called Ford Semi-Gloss Black, so it was the only semi-gloss I had here, so I used it. But anyway, got them painted, and I've actually installed them. I have brand new shackle bushings and brand new eyelet bushings up here. So I'm going to show you how I put in my bolts, and you know, everybody does stuff different. But so when you put your eyelet bolt in up here, it goes in this direction. So you got the thickness of the frame, you got to try to get that nut up in there. So what I use is a shallow 3/4 inch socket, and I stick the nut down in it like that, and then feed it up there in that hole. Get it started that way. And then I'll switch to a deep well. Stick it up in there. It's hard to do one-handed, but anyway, I'll end up putting a wrench on the other side and ratchet on this side, and I'll super tighten that down. Now, one thing I do on just about every time I do a chassis, I use the little anti-seize on all the threads. Just, you know, for me later, possibly, or, you know, 20, 30 years down the road, whoever else decides to tear the car apart and redo it, you know, it'll basically help them out. But anyway, I always take regular grease, like wheel bearing grease, and I just put a very, very thin, I just barely get it on my finger, and I run it on the outside of the new bushings, and I run it on the outside of these bushings as well. And I put just a little bit on the bushings themselves before I slip the bushings into the housings here, but just a little bit. I mean, you don't have to glop it on there. It's really not necessary, but for me, I like to have it lubricated just a little bit for when, you know, it goes together. And I'll tell you why. The very first 55 Chevy two-door sedan I ever restored, I did a frame-off restoration. Very first one, I was like 20 years old. And I rebuilt the entire front end of the car, but did not have the motor and transmission in it. And I tightened down every bit of the A-arm bushings, tightened them all the way down, brand new A-arm bushings in the A-arms. I tightened the washers and the bolts on the ends. I tightened everything down completely, and then assembled the car. When your engine's out, your suspension is all the way up because there's no weight on it. So what happened was when I put the motor and transmission in, it pushed the suspension down while I installed everything super tight and super dry, and it ripped the rubber bushings and the A-arm bushings, peeled them out. That was how I learned. That was the school of hard knocks. So I had to go back and do those A-arm bushings again. If you've ever done A-arm bushings in a Tri-5 Chevy, it sucks. So anyway, I got to do it twice, and it cost me double for the bushings. So, you know, because I had to do them twice. But so ever since, anytime I have a rubber bushing in a suspension part, I'll put just a little bit of grease on there. That little bit is just enough to let that thing, you know, have a little bit of lubrication for when all the weight goes on it and you drop it down and all this stuff moves. So anyway, you don't have to do that. I'm just telling you, that's what I do. You know, I don't care how anybody else does. It's just what I do. But I do anti-seize all the threads. I anti-seize these threads on the stems on that, and I also anti-seize that bolt. I even wiped a little bit on the sleeve of the bolt that goes into the steel bushing and the eyelet, just, you know, so it doesn't seize up in there. Anyway, guys, leaf springs are mounted. Other than finishing torquing and everything down, I'm happy with it. One thing done, it took all day, but I spent about an hour looking for my new bushings. And I had actually thrown them in a box of interior parts. Of all places, I had everything labeled in boxes and stuff. And I put the suspension parts and the interior parts. So that was fun. Anyway, thanks for watching.